Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start our next session, the last session of presentations of the action plans of the working groups. We invite Mr. Robert Zinger, CEO and Executive Vice President of the World Jewish Congress, to moderate the last panel of presentation of the working groups.
Okay.
You can do it from here.
Okay, thank you, Gideon. As they say, the best was saved for last. So we'll open the last session of the action plan presentation. I think we have an outstanding panel, and the three action plans that are going to be presented: one on legislation and enforcement in combating antisemitism. The second one is interfaith dialogue as an instrument in mitigating antisemitism, and the third one is maintaining continuation of diaspora Jewish life. So we'll start with the first working group. The three co-chairs will make the presentation. Let me just introduce the group members or group co-chairs. The first one is, of course, Professor Dina Porat, and I don't think that Professor Porat needs an introduction, but Dina is the head of the Cantor Center of the Study of Contemporary European Jewry, and incumbent of the Alfred Sianer, chair of the study of contemporary anti-Semitism and racism at Tel Aviv University. And she's also a chief historian of Yad Vashem. The second co-chair is Talia Naamat, who is a legal researcher in the Faculty of Law of Bar-Ilan University. And the third presenter is Michael Salberg, who served as ADL's Associate National Director and Director of International Affairs since July 2006. Prior to that, Michael was the ADL's General Counsel from the time he joined ADL in 2003. Now, the rules of the game are the same as you had in different presentations. Each one of the working group will present in 15 minutes, and then we'll have 10-15 minutes for the questions and answers, and we hope to complete in 1 hour exactly. Thank you. Dina, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all who are here, despite the late hour. תודה רבה. תודה. Okay. 1,200 years BC, that is about 3,200 years ago, Moses went down the Mount of Sinai and gave the Hebrew tribes the 10 Commandments. And by giving them a law, made them a people, a nation. Because law, legislation, and later constitution unite a society, give the society values and a self-image. A law, said one of the partners, of the members of our working group, Mr. Schusterschitz from Austria, he said, quite rightly so, a law is a moral statement. In light of that, our group has worked. It has been composed of excellent professionals, activists, excellent people and partners. And I'd like to thank them, to thank Mr. Michael Salberg of the ADL, and first of all, to thank Talia Naamat, Advocate Talia Naamat, my colleague in the Cantor Center in Tel Aviv University. To tell you frankly, she did most of the work. We also worked in light of knowing that there is no, as she said, one-size-fits-all law. There is no one-size-fits-all law that we can recommend as a group, as individuals. because a law both shapes society and is shaped by it. In the US and Canada, freedom of speech is sacred, a sacred tenet, while in Europe, because of obvious historical reasons, it is not at all. An expression considered an insult in Western Europe is common language in Eastern Europe. A law that has been a good one before 1990, before the beginning of the present wave of immigration to Europe, to Northern America, is not good anymore. Still, we worked hard, knowing that nevertheless, legislation is a tool very relevant to our cause. Therefore, we'd like to bring you our insights and our recommendations. Insights by Mr. Salberg and recommendations by Talia Naamat.
Thank you, Dina, for that introduction to our work. I also want to express my gratitude to you and to Talia, you as an outstanding scholar, Talia as a brilliant legal mind, brought to our work a dedication that we all benefited from. And I think that as we approached the sessions of our working group, we were guided by two principles. First, an acknowledgement that a fundamental element of strong and healthy democratic societies is a commitment to equality and fair treatment for all of its members. This is the basis for an expectation of protection against hatred, bigotry, and prejudice toward any individual or minority. And fulfilling that commitment is the responsibility that each member of society owes to every other member. Secondly, we were committed to conducting our discussions within the working groups with respect for the variety of historical, cultural, regional, and national differences, and for the varying stages in the development of democratic traditions, institutions, judicial processes and precedents, and civil society capacity among the world's democracies. These principles were reflected in the presentations from government and non-governmental participants in the working group. They were reflected in our deliberations and in the many thoughtful recommendations for action offered by the members of our working group. The specific actions put forth by our working group are consistent with these principles. As some of the other working group presenters have suggested today, enlisting support and building coalitions are critical to our daily task confronting and combating anti-Semitism. All the more so when we seek protection from the law. Experience tells us the ability to extend our successes in counteracting and effectively responding to the ever-evolving manifestations of anti-Jewish rhetoric and violence is significantly enhanced by establishing, broadening, maintaining, and strengthening alliances with like-minded leaders throughout civil society, from other faith traditions, in the academy, and in political life. And with that, I'll turn to Talia to go through and present the specific recommendations from our working group. Thank you.
Dina and Michael, thank you for the compliments. They're very much appreciated. The following are the legislation working group's main recommendations. I'll begin with general recommendations. As Michael spoke about, the group does not call for uniform measures to be taken in all countries, but recognizes the varying legal environments and does not impose recommendations that are not consistent with the legal and historical context of the particular country. The group recognizes that legislation alone is not enough and that legal measures must be accompanied by other measures, including work and education within civil society. This is especially true with respect to the newer democracies. Bottom-up measures should be complemented with top-down measures. Legal advocacy in the field of anti-Semitism should be undertaken within a larger framework and as a joint effort with other anti-racist advocacy groups, such as protection of the Roma, Muslims, and other minorities. In connection with the 10-year anniversary of the OSCE conference in Berlin in 2014, we suggest or call for the following: to set up a group to evaluate the progress that has been done since then and what has not been accomplished, to call for parliamentarians that have signed the London Declaration and the Ottawa Protocol to have these adopted by their governments, and that Jewish community leaders should take part in this process, to promote the establishment of additional interparliamentary inquiries on anti-Semitism, such as those already operating in the UK and Italy, in all countries which have experienced significant levels of anti-Semitism within the last 5 years. The purpose of these parliamentary inquiries should be to determine how best to enact and implement measures to combat anti-Semitism within each respective country. This may include both processes for implementing multilateral commitments and also processes for determining whether the specific conditions in each country require unique approaches. Wherever legislation is lacking or requires refining, the group recommends a comparative approach and the adoption of best practices from other countries. We call for the amendment of national laws, where applicable, that any person may file a suit against discrimination or harassment and not only the victim. Now, these were the recommendations of a more general nature, and apart from those, the working group also focused on 3 main issues to tackle from a legal perspective, which were the internet, anti-Semitism on campuses, and extremist political groups. We realized early on that many of the themes overlapped among the various groups, so we will not repeat any recommendations that have already been made, and we will also not test your patience and get into overly technical recommendations. With respect to the internet, the group recommends that internet intermediaries, such as Facebook and Google, should be approached in order to prepare a charter of common values, and that engaging the intermediaries should be done within a legislative framework. When prohibiting hate speech on intermediaries' platforms is not enough or possible, then to call upon them to disclose the identity of the perpetrators of hate. With respect to anti-Semitism on campuses, the group recommends that combating anti-Semitism in campuses should be done through a strong anti-racist advocacy presence on campus, and that it should be undertaken within a larger framework of anti-racism and not pertaining exclusively to anti-Semitism, and to call for the creation of alliances. If prohibition is not possible, then at the very least to require the disclosure of the source of funding of groups that are active on campuses in inciting hatred against students. All governments should require universities to disclose whether they are funding student organizations which engage in racist or anti-Semitic behavior. And to promote, together with college and university administrators, the adoption of uniform regulations that clearly distinguish the boundaries between academic freedom and the harassment and intimidation of students based on religion, ethnicity, and political affiliation. With respect to extremist political parties, the group recommends that Laws prohibiting neo-Nazi symbols and incitement to hatred rhetoric should be stringently applied and enforced on political parties. Political parties should be held accountable for such activities. Public funding should be suspended if party members publicly deny the Holocaust, take part in racist or anti-Semitic attacks, or use Nazi salutes or symbols in Parliament. That's all. Thank you.